what's happening in the Middle East and how it affects Russia and China. Trump's latest statement concerns his remarks about regime change in Iran, noting that Ayatollah Khamenei could lose power. In this context, there was a major strike on Sunday. The United States used B-2 bombers and dropped 6 GBU-57 heavy bombs, each weighing 13 tons. Lavrov and Medvedev made a sudden, loud appearance. Lavrov spoke with Orban about an escalation. Arakchi is set to meet Putin, and Secretary Ruby stressed the need to respond. The key issue is whether the strike truly weakened the axis of evil and if the Kremlin felt genuinely threatened. You are speaking in the appropriate terminology. One could argue here that Putin is supposedly indispensable in negotiating with terrorists because he himself acts like a terrorist. However, this is not true. On the contrary, he has been given to understand that he did not help in the settlement with terrorist allies and participants like the Ukrainian suicide bombers. Everything managed to be organized without his involvement. This emphasizes how insignificant his role was. Medvedev's reaction is simply a projection of Putin's own irritation. From time to time, Medvedev makes statements reminiscent of previous ones, such as when Kellogg commented on his words thanking him for revealing his true intentions. This is reminiscent of when Putin avoided direct comments about external pressure on Russia and the need to move toward peace. Since he can't openly express his displeasure with Trump, Medvedev takes on that role. Then he made a similar statement in tone, voicing harsh remarks against the United States. Now the topic of nuclear weapons is being brought up again, which looks more like an attempt to probe the ground for pressure. This is done through a figure of uncertain status, and even Vance commented on Medvedev's remarks yesterday, wondering whether he was speaking as an official or as a person with certain personal problems, alluding to his health. I wonder what the US reaction will be, especially against the backdrop of the upcoming NATO summit, where leaders who are well aware of the true value of Putin, Medvedev, and all Russian pseudo-peace plans, including the situation in Ukraine and Iran, will gather. All of these developments ultimately lead to what you originally said. There are 3 persistent forces on the planet that ignore international signals. They are Putin's Russia, the Ayatollah in Iran, and Kim Jong-un in North Korea, who has the covert but not full support of China. They have all been shown what can happen if they remain unresponsive. We should now expect possible moves on Putin's part. Pay attention to his tone. When he is in his own circle, especially after informal events, he sounds self-assured, saying that Ukraine is one nation and that it should be with Russia. However, when interviewed by foreign journalists, the tone changes dramatically. His voice becomes restrained, timidity appears, and he talks about a possible peace agreement on the condition of Ukraine's neutral status. The territorial issue is put on the back burner. Rostislav, it seems to me that Putin clearly divides the messages. One, he speaks for the domestic audience in Russia and Ukraine. The other, for the United States. Returning to the topic of strikes and the so-called axis of evil, The Telegraph writes that the US attacks on Iran are a serious signal for both Moscow and Beijing. In my opinion, Putin was sure that he could behave as follows: I stay in the Kremlin, demonstrate alleged readiness for negotiations, Trump is satisfied with it, and I continue to fight. This is exactly what Medvedev was talking about when he said that negotiations are only necessary as a cover for continuing the war. So the strike on Iran should have alerted Putin. If earlier he was sure that Trump would not dare to take tough measures, now he may have to think, why can't Moscow be the next step? Why should Trump endure deception indefinitely? In Moscow, the attitude toward Trump was condescending, as if he were a clown. I know this from personal communication with some of my counterparts. They scoffed, feigning fear of him, like the hyenas in the cartoon The Lion King, when they feigned fear in front of Scar. The behavior in front of Trump was the same. Perhaps at some point Trump realized that he was being mocked by figures like Putin and his entourage, and that mockery began to seep into the American press and the consciousness of the electorate. For Trump, it became a painful blow to his ego and political prospects. He likely acted not only because of his attitude toward Iran and the Ayatollahs, but also out of a desire to protect Israel and to show that he was still able to influence. This is no doubt due to the close relationship with America. Most likely it was also a desire to demonstrate to dictators their place and show that he can look for a compromise for a long time. But if he realizes that he is being misled, he starts to act without paying attention to potential benefits or risks. And the risks, especially given the situation in Iran, are really significant. This is an important signal for us as well. It is becoming clear that Putin will soon face serious questions from our Federikovich Lyona. Rostislav, can we say that any sanctions will be imposed after all? There's a lot of talk about that. We have already mentioned Republican Lindsey Graham and Democrat Richard Blumenthal, who have introduced a bill to that effect. According to CNN, the discussion may be postponed until July because of the escalation in the Middle East. Experts believe that Ukraine should focus not so much on sanctions as on acquiring an arms package. Ukraine is working on both this area and the issue of sanctions. Which of these is more important and whether there will be sanctions is a complex and multifaceted question. You and I discuss events on the airwaves so often that the combination of Graham Blumenthal has already turned into something like Brennementhal. It sounds almost like a made-up name. This may seem funny, but it's worth remembering how Trump's other initiatives once seemed unserious. He may indeed look like a clown, but the fact remains that his policies have led to many of the tragedies we see daily in Ukraine. Nevertheless, sometimes he takes tough and decisive measures. In the Iran situation, almost everyone was sure that Trump would once again limit himself to a series of postponements. 2 more weeks, then 2 more weeks, and so on and so forth. This feeling was shared by many in the international community and among those who are closely following what is happening. Trump suddenly realized he looked like a clown and made the decision to push the red button. No one can guarantee Putin that a similar thing will not happen to Russia, especially since Russia and Iran have a treaty on strategic cooperation. Araghchi, Iran's chief negotiator and the only senior Iranian official to emerge from the shadows, is traveling to Moscow today. His visit is undoubtedly aimed at asking Putin for help. But what help can he offer against the backdrop of Medvedev's recent statement, which explicitly stated that Russia would transfer nuclear technology to Iran? In such a situation, Trump may change the tone of his communication with Putin and perhaps no longer limit himself to ironic phrases like, "Dear Vladimir, let's make some progress," in capital letters. Ukraine has no cards? Of course not. In terms of basic reputation management, no one would advise Trump to do such a thing, and he is doing a pretty good job of it on his own. I expect a certain hardening of his stance toward Putin. It may not be public because there are strong indications that the negotiations between Russia and the US have moved into a closed format. There are too many behind-the-scenes agreements. Gas flows are being discussed, or the exchange of something significant. All this is preferred not to be publicized. In addition, it is already clear that Trump has repeatedly faced deception from Putin. Putin promised something, Trump made loud statements to journalists right on the plane, and then found himself in an awkward position. Apparently, Trump has decided that he will first shake all the gold out of this Pinocchio, and then, when he is sure he can get him to act, only then will he announce his intentions. Obviously, he is acting in this logic. Alexei, if we talk about relations between Iran and Moscow, we should recall the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, where the main international participants were Taliban Russian delegations. The Husis were not invited there, which is surprising. Perhaps they were unable to get there because of the blocking of the strait, and both their inflatable boats were busy blocking the Arma Canal. Most likely. Putin has already stated, how are we supposed to help Iran? By going to war. He also mentioned Israel, calling it a Russian-speaking country, with a large number of people from the former Soviet Union. It is not clear whether this sounded like a threat, as if interference could be justified where there are Russians, or an attempt to justify not supporting Iran in attacking Israel. The other question is whether Iran realizes that Russia is in fact backing away from its obligations to a strategic partner with which it has only recently ratified a treaty. So far, Russia has not definitively abandoned its support for Iran. The final clarification may come after the visit to Moscow of one of the most senior Iranian officials, Foreign Minister Havryshchak, who is in active contact with the outside world. His visit is likely to be accompanied by symbolic support. Iran is about to experience what Ukraine has already experienced. I take no joy in the deaths of civilians. It is a tragedy anywhere in the world. When authorities who once acted with impunity are held accountable, it's seen as justice, especially for those who supported Putin's aggression against Ukraine. But what connection does Iran have to Ukraine, and why did it get involved? Did you really think the world would approve of that? That it would be a plus at a time when it would be decided whether to dialogue with you, when you so blatantly intervened in someone else's war, supporting someone the entire civilized world considers a criminal? Did you expect it to go without consequences? Now that they're confronted with consequences, I don't rejoice in the suffering, but self-righteousness has its cost. So when Putin casually suggests discussing matters at the UN and Iraqi brings up the missiles, the reply is simply, "What missiles? I have urgent matters to handle." Couple of important calls, I'm outta here. Hang in there, brother. We're with you till the end. And that's when the whole world will see that Putin is scared of Trump, that Iran is left alone. This will be a powerful signal for the whole world and for Trump to show that pressure on Putin is possible and has an effect. In this context, new steps are possible. Sanctions, defense support for Ukraine, actions by Graham and Blumenthal. It would be extremely embarrassing to announce at the NATO summit the withdrawal of aid to Ukraine, so it is logical to expect continued support. Perhaps words and actions will not match again, but in the current situation, it is the signals that are important. If they lead to Putin backing away from Ukraine and stopping the violence, that would already be a significant result. If we already mentioned the International Economic Forum in St. Petersburg, which took place on June 18, 21, It is worth noting that Putin spoke a lot about the situation with Ukraine there, about territories, retreats, and brotherly nations. However, instead of the specialized topics expected at an economic forum, the focus shifted to politics. Despite Putin's statements about economic growth in 2023-2024, his government, the central bank, Nabiullina and Siluanov, recognized serious difficulties, lack of funds and exhausted reserves. This was explicitly mentioned by Nabiullina, who is actually trying to stabilize the consequences of Putin's decisions since 2022. The forum itself, if it used to be a showcase of Russian greatness and a Vanity Fair, has now lost this role. In my time, when the St. Petersburg Forum started, I was often there and I know very well what was going on, both on the platforms and behind the scenes. At that time, it really served as a demonstration of achievements the country was developing. Leaders of major countries and prominent world scientists came, and Russia dialogued with them on an equal footing. It made sense and was realized. Today, the forum has turned into a symbol of how much the country has lost its position. The forum was attended by representatives associated with violence and repression, including those who directly violate women's rights by keeping them in a position of real slavery. This is the kind of company we had to deal with. The atmosphere of the forum was particularly revealing when outspoken statements began to be made. Nezdorov noted that Makarov was the only one who showed courage amidst the general silence. Nabiullina had only hinted before, but now Makarov directly stated that the country is on the brink of disaster. He warned that if measures are not taken urgently, the consequences will be serious. What measures we are talking about is clear to everyone, because it is obvious what is destroying the Russian budget and economy. The same assessments are voiced by Max Reshetnikov, the minister, whose position is also alarming. He and I had been in contact once before, about 15 years ago. At that time, he gave the impression of a reasonable man, and it was clear that he would go far. His systemic liberal views were known to me even then. What he said at the forum, including his direct statement about the coming recession in Russia without the necessary solutions, speaks for itself. It is clear to anyone who still has common sense in the so-called Russian elites, who are busy with domestic consumption and self-destruction from morning to night. This is the moment of truth. If they do not stop what is happening, if they do not find a way to stop everything and at least try to roll the situation back, even if with minimal chances of success, a systemic collapse awaits them. The forum was a kind of recognition of the current state of the country. The final question concerns arguably the most important event of not only the week, but perhaps the entire summer, although the wording sounds glib in the context of Trump and his attitude towards the alliance. Tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, on the 24th or 25th, a summit of NATO countries will be held in The Hague, Netherlands. What exactly will be decided there is an open question, but how ready the countries are to face the challenges remains a key topic. It is known that an agreement has been reached. Each NATO member country will allocate 5% of GDP for defense, but by 2035. The problem is that the war is happening now. People are dying. Missiles are flying at this moment, not 10 years from now. It is clear that there are budgetary processes and electoral constraints, but when Europe really needs to find reserves, they will be found. This is a large political economic association, and if there is an urgent need, resources will appear. That is how it usually happens. As for expectations from the NATO summit, it is worth considering the current situation. Today the world is on the brink of catastrophe. and figures like Putin, Ayatollah, Uranov, and others who have joined this destructive agenda are guilty of this. America is essentially making a choice for everyone, and instead of everyone else deciding to engage in direct confrontation, the NATO summit on the 24th to 25th is bringing together allies who are confirming what is happening is a reality with which one cannot turn a blind eye. In such an environment, it is impossible to imagine Trump coming out and declaring, "Don't offend my friend Putin, he gave me a gas pipe." That's out of the question. There are times when even the most charismatic politician cannot afford certain moves. Trump undoubtedly has incredible political luck. The fact that he's made it to the presidency twice speaks volumes. But it is because of this that he likely realizes where the line is drawn that should not be crossed. At the very least, the Americans will make the right speeches. The question is whether they will be followed by real actions. The statements themselves also influence Putin by setting a certain framework. If Ukraine is given at least something, weapons, sanctions, measures to pressure Russia, it will become a little easier. Perhaps it will help reduce the number of crazy nights like tonight's, which is probably the 100th in the last few months.